Is about to begin. It's Women's Empowerment, Past, Present, and Future of the Women's Movement. And it's moderated by Lana Nasser. She is a member of ADC's National Board. Lana?
Thank you, Chris. Good morning, everyone. Nice to meet you, and I'm happy to have everyone here today, and I'm very excited to talk to these dynamic and brilliant women on a topic that we all know is quite important. My name is Lana Nasser, and I'm a board member here at the ADC. I'm going to start with Imani Barakat. I'm pleased to introduce her. Imani is a Palestinian-American community organizer, a former fashion designer, and an activist based in Southern California. Originally from the village of Tartura, a beach town near the suburbs of Haifa. She's dedicated to advancing the unequivocal rights of all people with a particular focus on refugees, the right to self-determination, and equality for the Palestinian people. She serves on several nonprofit organizations advocating for a Palestinian freedom. She's currently the national chairperson for Al-Odeh, Palestine Right to Return Coalition, and the vice president of the Palestine Foundation. Imani is also a grassroots and campaign organizer in coordination with several coalitions in Los Angeles. Welcome, Imani. Secondly, I'm going to introduce Noura Sarsour. Noura is a longtime activist for decolonization of education, educational equity and access, and transnational feminism. She's the founder of Center for Women Empowerment and became active in Palestine itself as a grassroots media coordinator and educator. She was an educator in several refugee camps and designed curriculum and programs, and she continued her career in Jordan and Kuwait. A doctoral student in higher education, Noura is a published researcher dedicated to issues of community-based models for sustainable access and equity in higher education. She currently serves as the director for a college persistence program that serves hundreds of youth nationally. Noura is most concerned with voice and representation in tandem to self-advocacy. She and her friends host a podcast called Feel in the Room, which centers on the voices of Muslim women and their daily lives. She's a national committee member to U.S. Palestinian Community Network, where she spearheads the liberation and dignity of campaigns alongside Mecca to aid the Gazan people as an alternative to conditional politicized aid, all the while organizing the Palestinian community in SoCal. But most importantly, she answers to Yama and is a mother. Welcome, Noura. Thirdly, I'm proud to introduce community leader Mervet Judy. Marvette is the daughter to Muhammad and Rabiha Judy from Turmusiya, Palestine. She has always had passion for justice. She is an advocate for women, Muslims, Arab Americans, immigrants, Palestinians, and she's the former vice chair for the Arabic American Caucus of the California Democratic Party. She's an executive board member of the California Democratic Party, 65th District, former vice for the Arabic American Civic Council. She's currently a commissioner in the city of Buena Park, has advocated for resolutions, bills, and policy that better represents and protects Arab Americans, Muslims, and Palestinians. Most recently, she advocated for the support of HR 2590, which I will let her elaborate. We are excited to have all of you join us and look forward to a very fruitful discussion.
Salamat, everyone. It is great to be here with all of you today, and thank you to the ADC team for organizing today's conference. Palestinian women in resistance have been and continue to be an integral part of the struggle against the ongoing colonization of Palestine. From strategizing and actively orchestrating popular resistance movement to shaping the political discourse throughout each key milestone in our history. This includes the 1936 revolution, the genocide of 1948, the war of 1967, the first intifada in 1987, the second intifada in 2000, and the popular resistance in shaping and leading the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement in 2005 until today. Their participation in the national struggle began with the emergence of the Palestinian cause toward the end of the 19th century, when the first Jewish colonies were built. The first remarkable female political activity was in the town of Afula in 1893, when women demonstrated against the construction of a new Jewish settlement following the killing of 9 Palestinian women in the 1929 Western Wall riots in Jerusalem. The first Arab Women's Association was formed, as well as the Arab Women's Union in October 1929. These unions embarked on several economic, social, cultural, and national efforts, such as planning and organizing demonstrations and writing letters to the Arab leaders to support Palestinians. In their active resistance against the British mandate and Zionism, Palestinian women were not confined to their supportive relationship with a man as a wife, a daughter, or a sister. These women bore significant responsibility for sustaining armed resistance, primarily undertaken by men. They traded and sold their jewelry for rifles. They supplied food, arms, and information to the fighters. The First Intifada ushered in a grassroots popular resistance to the violence of the Israeli occupation. Women demonstrated with men in large protests. A fearless community of women activists took part in the movement, building self-sufficiency for Palestinians under Israeli occupation and collectively blazing a trail of resistance. Palestinian women have transcended all traditional barriers and have been civically engaged in all forms of resistance. They help preserve the national identity, uniting their dispersed families, clinging to the memory of Palestinians raised by refugee families who never saw Palestine. Beyond that, being a Palestinian woman means life, present, past, and future. We are the storytellers, the custodians of our history, the shapers of our culture, the accelerators and proliferators of our resilience. We do this by leveraging every aspect of our culture through oral history, embroidery, art, or cuisine. We do this to protect our existence, because our people's mere existence is resistance. As storytellers, we are defining our Palestinian identity and contributing to our memory and resistance. Our determination as mothers in preserving our culture has been one of our most effective tools in our struggle for liberation. No doubt, our people have struggled generation after generation to cement our identity. We've inherited values and traditions from our parents and grandparents. The love and connection we have for our land and people, the guilt many of us carry, and the pain we continue to endure from living in exile are rooted in how we raise our children and grandchildren. It is also genuinely fascinating to see the length in which we take to preserve and celebrate our traditions. Just look at how we plan our children's weddings, or even how we choose their names. Tell me how many Nadals, Jihads, or Thairs are in your families. Look how we decorate our homes, or how we proudly share ma'lube or ma'mul with our neighbors and friends. And not to forget the gardening traditions that many of us are proud to continue, like planting olive trees, citrus trees, grapevines, and even za'atar. While we intentionally expose our culture and traditions to our children, please make no mistake, it is also a lifestyle that breathes fluidity to our homes. It is not a formal class we teach our kids, but our way of living and celebrating life, as our parents showed us through their examples. But as much as we like to talk about the brave women who face adversity with resilience, we also must acknowledge the pain, the trauma, and the hardships women endure from the daily challenges and humiliation of occupations and dispossession. They are the mothers and grandmothers who carry the pain of imprisoned or lost children, as well as lost homes. They are the courageous political prisoners in Israeli jails. They are the ones standing up to their oppressors at the risk of imprisonment and death. They are the women who live their lives with no certainty that the child they sent to school will return home. They are the women who sleep fully clothed in case they are evacuated in the middle of the night because their homes will be demolished. On a personal note, my heart aches every time I think of my mother's story and the pain she carried quietly in her heart throughout her whole life. You see, my mom was 3 years old when my grandfather was martyred in Jerusalem, 1948. My grandmother, who had 11 other children, went into a deep depression, and my mother and her older brother were placed in Hind al-Husseini Dar al-Tifl orphanage to alleviate some of her mother's pressure. She was there for her early childhood years. She returned home, and she could not be happier to be among her siblings and mother. Sadly, it wasn't long until she took off with her brother to Egypt to pursue her education. Right after she finished, she got a teaching job in Bahrain. In the summer of 1967, she visited her brother in Kuwait, where she met my father, and shortly after the 1967 war, they got married. A year later, I was born, and in 1969, she lost her mother. My mom, Allah yarhamha, was a beautiful woman in every sense. Loving and very kind, but she had this sadness about her that I could never explain. For years, we lived with it and accepted it because we did not know any better. It was not until I was a teenager and after several times of asking her to tell us more about her childhood that she opened up. I understood then why she chose to hide her childhood pain from all of us. No doubt, it was too painful for her to talk about what it meant to grow up without a father and away from her mother and siblings, whom she loved dearly. Although I felt such sadness for the pain and suffering she carried quietly in her heart all these years, I realized for the first time how strong and resilient she is. And as I grew older and I became more entrenched in my activism for our Palestinian cause, I realized my mother's story wasn't unusual. Unfortunately, many Palestinian women suffered from traumas like this and even worse. Whether it is my mother or her mother, Palestinian women have always and continue to craft the blueprint for our resilience and steadfastness. I sincerely believe this to be true, and will close with a quote from our poet Mahmoud Darwish, who said, "Mother, I will not name you a woman, I will name you everything." Thank you.
Thank you, Amani. That was beautiful. Noura?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for sharing space and welcoming me here today. I think when it comes to the term women's empowerment, defining what that is extremely important. And taking into consideration the context in which it is defined is particularly important because from that we could potentially harm other women. And when I say that, I mean in the sense that women's empowerment, when we define it in institutions here in the US, might mean something different in other locations in the world or even within the US in other communities. And we can encounter an imposition when people define women's empowerment on behalf of those women. I lived overseas, I lived in Palestine, and I lived in the Arab world, and I left the US entirely. And it really humbled me to re-examine the values that I was raised with, the experiences I had, but most importantly, the context that framed my upbringing and my perspective on life. And so when I moved overseas as a young woman, a newly graduated undergrad from Los Angeles, and I went back home and I saw the reality of women there, it made me realize that it is not necessarily my role to impose my American perspective, but rather to drive the idea for collective liberation across all borders. And I think that's super important as we examine our own communities here, especially in the context of being Arab in the US or being a part of a diasporic community or even being an immigrant. How do we define women's empowerment in relation to where we are, but also in relation to the class that we belong to? And I think this issue is in particular, like, really important to our dynamics as Arab, as a community here, is being class conscious. Because even within the Arab community, we see social values being upheld for maybe those with higher economic status, but then we see exclusion of those who are working class or those who just got here as refugees. And because we're maintaining this class-conscious approach to what we define culture as or what we define religion as or what our values are, we are in fact disenfranchising many people. And as a result of that, I see, for example, I live out in the Inland Empire, there's a lot of Syrian, Iraqi refugees who have come out that way, and we look at them and we say, that was us when we first came here. My question is, why? If we already did this, why do they have to go through the same struggle? And I see mothers worried about, will my children retain their Arabi? Will they retain their traditional practices? What are the spaces that I include them in or find? What's available to me as a working class refugee mother? And to me, that speaks to my obligation. I'm the child of immigrants. I've navigated higher education here. I've gone from a blue-collar family now to a white-collar job. What is my duty to the collective of Arab, whether here in the US and abroad? And I think that's super important when we're considering transnational liberation. To me, it's not just, oh, women's empowerment is how you dress, or, oh, you got a degree. That doesn't guarantee anything. You can flip around and oppress a whole other community. Just a few weeks ago, I was out in LA for the Chicanx moratorium. And in front of me was a mother and her children, and her son was killed by the LA police in the same spirit that our sons are killed back home in Palestine. And I'm looking at them because I've seen that sight when I was back home in Palestine. And in front of me, this mother, this Chicanx mother, to me is also the mother of a shaheed, in my opinion. And I'm looking and I'm saying, wow, women globally must bear so much burden in carrying that pain, in raising the next generation, in healing, in continuing on our narrative, and in investing in our survival, all the while we are facing everything that confronts us outside of just that particular context. Because then you zoom out, and right next to it, you see the indigenous community. We're on stolen land right here. I view myself as a settler on stolen land. And at the same time, I'm advocating for the liberation of my people who are confronting Europeans and people colonizing and stealing their own land. So empowerment, I think, is let's be honest with ourselves and let's acknowledge the privilege we've acquired and the harm that sometimes does to other communities, and think, what have I gained in my upward mobilization, in my academics, in my wealth? How can I wield that now to uplift other people, especially women? That's our role in women's empowerment, in my opinion. And while we confront that as a collective, it's super important that we build out allyship across different communities. Where I grew up, there was no other Palestinians, there was no other Arab, there was no other Muslims. I was the only one trying to hold on to who I was. But I was raised in a Chicanx community, and they embraced me. And I will never forget that, because that showed that neighborly solidarity with one another. And until this day, I can go to them, and they will be on the streets with me when I protest for Palestine, without hesitation. On the other hand, to be super blunt, it's harder to mobilize our own community sometimes who don't come from that street. And that's a problem. And so we need these internal conversations as a community as to how we navigate class-conscious barriers, especially lately. gatekeeping that occurs in the community when a woman is harmed or she doesn't feel safe. How can she express herself in a way that's not detrimental to her community per se, but that she is supported, kept safe, she's empowered, she can speak her voice, she's not harmed, she's not silenced. She trusts in her community instead of looking outward and thinking who can help me against my community. Because that's a danger too that we're seeing now with things and this new generation thinking, well, does my community even have my back? Who else can I turn to? And so we fracture even more. And I think these models are very intentional in a capitalist, imperialist society. It's meant to break us down so that we turn against each other. But I think now, at least for me, is thinking, I have a daughter, she's 8 years old. How do I make sure that she's still a part of this community and this community is strong and she will have a voice and she'll be able to navigate, and in turn, she will have the ideology to say, I need to invest back in that community. Not because of me right now, not because of my title, not because it's a sign of prestige, but because I want to guarantee the future of my children and the future children to come. Capitalism has ingrained itself in the competition within our community, in my opinion, to the point where we have harmed ourselves. It's not about this person did this or this person did that or this organization uplifted itself more than the other. In the end, Palestine is hurting. In the end, Arab are hurting. In the end, we're hurting at home, thinking, where's our future leading us now? It's time, in my opinion, to really strategize and take all the expertise in this house here and think, what is our sustainability plan? How do we ensure representation and voice for women? How do we also guarantee that our men are not emasculated by this system or silenced or afraid? Because we saw that too with our community. And I think that's why so many of our women had to rise to the occasion and say, we're gonna take the lead now. Because we had the FBI raid our homes and our stores, because we were policed, the women had to take the lead. But that doesn't mean they can take the lead forever. We need to come back together and relink and reinvigorate and think, what's the next step? What are we going to do? And so I'm hopeful that through this conversation, we can think of those next steps.
Thank you, Noura. That was very powerful, and we're definitely going to have a conversation later on about the next steps, because that is the key. That's why we're here, is to figure out what we're going to do moving forward. Mervet?
Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum. My name is Mervet Judah, and I'm Palestinian 100% from the Balad of Turmosaya. I was born in Puerto Rico, was there the first 6 years of my life, moved to Cudahy back in 1981, and let's just say the experience, that collaboration of experience as an Arab, as a Muslim, and even as Latin origins, although I'm not Latina by blood, just living the first 6 years and that being my language and going to school there first really had an impact of me as a person. So let's first talk about women, right? This is what this is about. This is about women empowerment. Woo! Women empowerment. So the good news is we're at a better place, right? We have Arab American representation in Congress now, thanks to Rashida Tlaib, Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib. We are seeing more women running for office, becoming entrepreneurs, getting educations, and like running organizations like Amani, or this incredible woman right here who's doing stuff in higher education. So I want to give you guys a big round of applause, because that needs to be acknowledged. Of course. What are we doing this for? I always say being a woman is hard, being an Arab woman is hard, and being a Muslim woman is even harder, and of course, if you're a black woman, that's even harder. And in the sense that you almost have to work for every opportunity or a goal you want to reach, you have to work so much harder. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my story. My story doesn't define all Arab women, but I'll tell you a little bit about mine and what I did with it. So I come, like I said, from a very old school town. So unlike Noura, I was raised with a lot of Arabs around me, and they had a certain way of how they perceived women, you know. So when I wanted to go to school, my family was like, "La, you know, no, you can't go to school here. Your options are get married, you know, or go to Jordan and get an education there. But we're not going to let our daughter get educated in America." I know, sounds very foreign, guys. I get it, but that was my hometown, and I love them. But that's what it was. So what I did is I told my father, I said, if I get a scholarship, will you let me go to college? And he's like, well, your mother's not gonna like it, but if you could figure it out, figure it out. So I had opportunities to go to Stanford, but my parents wouldn't let me go, believe it or not. But I said, I'll go anywhere, just let me go somewhere near. So I went to UCI. My family had a very hard time. My whole town had a protest. You would think it was a Palestinian protest. Literally, people were calling, how could you send her? How do you send your daughter to UCI? And you're doing this, she's gonna get pregnant and have a boyfriend. This was, and you know I'm telling the truth, right? Yeah, right? So this was my experience. So for the first 2 years of being at UCI with I went in there for biology. That's what was my struggle. I couldn't even get through my courses because I'm fighting my family's perceptions of what Mervet Judah is doing in school. All I wanted to do is have an opportunity. All I wanted to do is be independent, because all I ever saw in our community is women depending on men, period. And I didn't want that. That doesn't mean that the institution of marriage, there's something wrong with it. No, I just don't believe marriage should be about that for a woman. It shouldn't be about, having kids and taking care of a man and depending on a man. That's not how I perceived it. Not that there's anything wrong with that perception. So point is, I put myself through school, and then all I would get after I did graduate, my town had a big party, like, she did it. No boyfriends, no pregnancy, and she's still Arab and Muslim. So they had this big party, well, alhamdulillah, thank God. People started sending their daughters to school. I swear to God, I wish I could tell you guys this isn't true, but it is. And I had young ladies around my town. Thank you. But I had young ladies around my town saying, Mervet, you're the reason that we get to go to college. And I'm like, God, wow, that's crazy. Like, I'm a nobody. I'm a nobody. I was just somebody who wanted opportunity, a chance. So when we talk about women's empowerment, we have to start in the community first, right? We start here in our homes, in our towns, within our conversations. Some of the biggest struggles I've had regarding women empowerment have been within conversations with women themselves in our community, for the reasons Noura stated. Because, if she's from a higher class, right, maybe she should have more opportunity. But if she comes from a poorer house, maskina, poor girl, let her get a husband, and it shouldn't be that way. Women should be equal across the board, regardless of what family you come from, what dialect you speak. Girl, so I'm fallaha. I don't speak that way anymore. Fallaha is when you say chief halik instead of kif halik. Guess what? You go from level here. You say kif halik, you're right here. You say chief halik, you're right here. In the Arab world. I know this, I learned this the hard way because I married someone Medani, okay? So if you think about all these differentiations of how we perceive women, how we perceive Arabs, just because of the way we speak, does hijab make us forward or backward? It's none. It's your worship with Allah. People think, oh, look at me, I'm wearing modern clothes. That doesn't make you empowered. Your clothing doesn't empower you. It doesn't empower you. Our Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, you educate a man, you educate a man. You educate a woman, you educate a nation, right? So we must not only educate our women, we must give them opportunities on our boards, on our mosque boards, on our organizational boards. I dare you to ask this question. On American boards across the board, women represent 20% of boards. Sad, right? We get paid as women. I'm not going to talk about what the Arab experience yet. I'm just talking about women in general. In America, women, as a woman, you get paid 80 cents on the dollar. Just for being a woman, you may have the equal, exact qualifications, but your anatomy is different. You're a woman, right? You have the ability to bore children. Guess what? You get paid less for that, just for that, right? Instead of being honored for that. Well, for Arab women, it's probably 2% of our boards represent women, which is a shame. It really is a shame. It really is. Because us as women, I'm telling you as someone who was not born in the blood, right? I speak Arabic, alhamdulillah, and I am the one who bears the pressure of making sure my faith and my language and our culture is passed on to my princesses back there. Aya, say hi, princess. Aya and Salma. And the reason I do that is because I don't want their Arab American identity to be gone. Because although I don't agree with our culture, There's a lot of beauty in being an Arab American, and we should be proud of that identity, just like they should be proud of being Muslim. But they're two different things. The other thing is the definition of what it is to be an Arab and what it is to be a Muslim. So people associate Arabism with Islam, but it's actually not the same thing. Most Arabs in the United States are Christian. They are not Muslim, my friends. And most Muslims are Black Americans. Yet, guess what? Do we go whenever there are issues regarding Black American rights? Do we stand up for them? No, because we define that as a different, no, that's not our problem. That's not our problem. That's, that's their problem. But it isn't their problem. So going back as Arabs, we need to stop making these divisions. As Arabs, as Muslims and Arab Christians, we need to unite. We need to be identified as one. And yes, I do believe as Arab Americans, one day we need to make the census. But the way we do that is by uniting and stop looking at each other like we're not exactly like them just because one of us is Christian and the other is Muslim, right? So in order for us, and I believe women are the key to making that happen. Because women inside of them innately have this ability to want to unite, to want to engage, to want to embrace, and to want to collaborate and connect. And that's why I feel we're the key. So you put us on those boards, right? Put us in office, like Rashida Tlaib. Look at the incredible work. Which one of you here didn't cry when you saw her in the Congress pleading the cause for Palestinians, Palestinian or not? Were you proud of that moment? Can I tell you, do you know she's the first Arab American and the first Palestinian? She's not the first Muslim. She's the first Muslim female, but not the first Muslim Congress member. That didn't happen before, but it took a woman, baby. That's right. It took a woman to make it there. Did any of you know when in May of this year, when she went up to Mr. Biden and said, hey, what's going on when they were bombing Gaza and they were taking over the towns in Palestine, Silwan? When they were doing that, she went up to Biden. He's the president of the United States, and she went right up to him because that's what women do, especially Palestinian women, especially Arab American women. We're brave, we're resilient, right? So we need to treat women at an equal level. In our faith, I can't speak on Christianity, but I will talk about Islam since we are a very judged religion. In Islam, we are supposed to be treated equally, period. Do you want to know why we're not? It's our leadership. So you want to empower women? Require board minimums of how much, a percentage of the women that have to be on every board. Put more women in leadership. And men have to stop using us for our hard work ethic and for our ideas and let us be up front because it's demasculating for them, right? So that's how you empower them. So that my Princess Aya and my Princess Salma and her beautiful daughter and all our daughters don't deal with the obstacles that we dealt with. Thank you so much for your time.
Well, that's a hard follow-up. Thank you, Mervet. The passion is clear, and so I'm happy that you're here today. The first question I have, which I think each one of you has already addressed, but as we all know, the theme of today's panel is women's empowerment, past, present, and future. I'll start with Imani. Imani, what does that phrase mean to you?
Thank you. Like I said, the women role in our struggle has been great. And what it means to me is we need to build on what our women have started since the 1930s. We have a really great examples that we learn from, and we need to continue to be that blueprint, like I said, for our resilience. As mothers, we have great responsibility. Like all of you have said, I truly believe that it starts with the home, and as a mother who is very mindful of raising generations of children that are aware of our hardships, are aware of our struggles, we have a lot to contribute to the outcome of how we are dealing with everything that's taking place right now. So I truly believe women are the one that are going to be liberating Palestine. I mean, I'm seeing it right now in our workspace, in our activism world. I'm seeing the amazing role women are playing, the many hats they are wearing, the amount of hours they put in without questioning if this was important or not important, and the influence they're giving to whether it is their children or the other men and women, they are in the same workplace. So I truly believe it all starts with a woman, and I really believe that we are getting somewhere. We're organizing, we're mobilizing, we're connecting, where our stories are being told and being heard, and we're making a difference. So there is a lot to what women are doing to advance our struggle. Thank you.
Thank you, Amani. I think for me, when I think about the past, I come from El Bire, right next to Ramallah, and a lot of our community had been coming to the US since 1900. We've been in the US for a while. Technically, my daughter is 5th generation American. But somehow, we have been able to remain connected to our village. We go back and we live there, we visit, we have homes, we send our children back to school. And I think about that a lot. If so many of the men had left early on, my own grandfather being drafted in World War II here, if he was here doing that, what was my grandmother doing back home? And in El Bire, and this might be true for other villages that had many of their men leave, in our village, we don't say like Dar Abdurrahman, they say Dar Hashime, my grandmother. We started referring to the homes in the name of the women, not the men, because the women were the ones who were holding it down while the men were away. And this carries on until today. And I think of that past. You know, my grandmother specifically during the '67 war took in the whole neighborhood into the garage and made sure that they were taken care of and everyone was safe. And my other grandmother, when my mother lost her father, she was my daughter's age. She was around 8 years old. My grandmother knows how to change a tire. She knows how to do all kinds of things because she had to survive, but she also had to step up, and she had many children. I think on that past of women being at the front reins of the movement and of survival. And in fact, during the Intifada, the women played a huge role in what was going on in the coordination between villages and passing on news between families within the villages, and also just preparing goods and selling goods to promote the boycott of any Israeli goods at that time. That was the women who did that. In addition to visiting the prisoners, in addition to advocating, in addition to healing those wounded, in addition to breaking down the rocks so they can go and throw them. The women are tough, and I think on my grandmother, at the end of '67, she went on her own to check on our farmland in Riha, and just to see the devastation and to come back and report that to everybody. That was our women. Untouched by an American experience, they stayed home to raise children, to protect the land, to cultivate the land, to farm it. I remember my grandmother carrying the big jugs of water on her head, barefoot, and in this society, they would say she needs to be empowered. They would say she's not educated enough. Look at what she's wearing. She's wearing some thobe. You know, then it's like, oh, she needs to be modernized. And that's why I warn, how do we protect against the projection of American ideals on the strong, resilient, and steadfast women back home and here? Because that's one of the obstacles that I face in the present now, is our families, to some degree, as I heard Professor Ahlam mentioning, have promoted this idea that if you try to navigate to be white or white passing, you'll be successful. You know, going to school and aspiring for these careers. But slowly, in education is a process of acculturation and assimilation for you to be a better American. That's the basis of education in the US. So while we were thinking, oh, we're Palestinian, I'm gonna go off to UCLA, slowly, my fallaha identity, there was some stripping of who I am, my skin as a person coming off and becoming more Americanized. And what I experienced back home are the American educated coming and trying to tell the women there, this is what you need. This is how you should act. This is democracy. But it was this narrated kind of planned speech that was being imposed. And I'll be frank, the women back home were like, huh, do they even know how to survive here? There's a sense of judgment, I think, in the present that we have to be very mindful of when it comes to assimilation and acculturation and really trying, and if you have the capacity, to leave this context and experience what it is to be a woman outside of here. When I was in Jordan, the amount of domestic abuse situations that I was privy to was absolutely horrifying. But I knew that they had no other choice. They couldn't really go anywhere. There were no institutions to support them. They had to survive and stay put. And for myself, as somebody with a passport, they would look at me and say, you're so lucky, you could just leave whenever you want. There was privilege there, and it broke my heart, and it breaks my heart until this day to know that not everyone can access the same thing. And I'm gonna keep repeating access throughout this because I think it's very important to our women, is what are they able to access and who do they have to maneuver through to access those resources? So in the present now, I think we always have to take a step back and think, how are we defining the future of women and how is it going to include everybody? Not just Palestinian. We keep talking about Palestine. There's other Arab too. And not just Arab. You know, black women and indigenous women here, we have a duty to them being on this stolen land. If we cannot address nor work with those communities, how the hell can we ever address our future? We have to talk about here in our backyard. And I think that's important when we then consider if our context is here in the US, then let's look specifically here in this space and think, who are the women that are not represented at this table? And I work in education. I've been in hiring spaces. I've seen how interviews go. So even for those who are just women of color, do they have a shot at making it to the table? A majority of educators in the US are white women. And I've seen the harm of that in classrooms. I had a Muslime from Al-Quds, from Jerusalem, bullied at a school because of the way she looked and the way she dressed, and she had zero advocates except for me. When she found out that I was Palestinian, she ran to me and said, can you help me? What can I do? This happened in class. This happened with this student. This is what they're sending me on social media. We have to guarantee the access of other women, regardless, so that we can protect each other and uplift each other and preserve each other. I have another situation where with admissions into engineering departments across different universities here in Southern California, where there's an active effort to recruit women of color to join computer software engineering. This was a woman-dominated field back in the 80s. And slowly, not slowly, actually very suddenly, the numbers flipped. And those deans now, those women who are in these spaces are like, there's no women left. I can't even keep a woman in this space because there's too much competition, there's too many men, they're not getting supported, they feel alienated, and they're begging, please send your students to be computer software engineers. It's easy for us to say, bring this woman here and it's gonna solve the problem. Increase the numbers here, okay, now we have representation. But that's not enough to sustain. What are the resources? What are the culture? What are the expectations? What are the avenues? All of that has to be taken into account. We see what diversity initiatives do in the US. We see what they do. They can prop up a picture and market, oh, we're diverse, and just pick the colors that they want, and that's all they did. That was the response to the BLM movement by a lot of corporations. That doesn't mean America changed. That just means it shifted. It's a chameleon. So how are we going to be ahead of that chameleon? How are we going to ensure that we are safeguarding our interests? And that leads me to the consideration of what the future is what is our role now in determining how do we bring in more women into the spaces that we've made it into. And it's not easy. I'll say, as a leader, it's not easy to do that. There's been a lot of upward battles for me personally in education. But I think if we stay committed, and if our goal is to uplift others and to alleviate the conditions of the communities that we represent, and we stay steadfast in it, we will see change. But I also will say it is a very burdensome and tiring cause. And so it's important to have the support of the community behind us so that we can continue forward. One of the campaigns that I lead with USPCN is Liberation and Dignity, and it's literally taking our duty here in the belly of the beast, where we have access to so much money and resources, and saying, how do we take this and we invest it back home to safeguard our people, but also invest in the longevity of their resistance, in their survival, rather than how do I just help them as a savior complex approach and that's it. We have to get in the mindset of sustainability. And what are we doing to increase the timeline of our longevity, our resistance, our survival, and the continuation of our traditions? Because unfortunately, there was a gap, I think, with my parents' generation to where they became totally invested in, well, go to school, but don't learn what this particular pattern in the thobe means. But wear that thobe that costs $2,000 because it looks good. But you don't need to understand what that means or where it came from. There's a trivialization occurring. There's a tokenization that's occurring. And I think that's one of the obstacles my generation's gonna face, is how do we rebound from some of that? You know, Debke is not just we do it and we go home. Debke has a lot of meaning, and there's a lot of political Debke that's done. Do we know the words? Do our children know how to do the zaghruta? Do we know how to cook our food? Do we know the seasons of our land? Do we even know what original za'atar looks like? No, because we've been removed from those contexts. So while we are here, how do we reimagine? How do we recreate these contexts so that in the moment of return or in the moment of liberation, our people as a collective are ready? In this present state, I don't think we're ready. It's very easy to say free Palestine and free the people, but do we know what that means? And are we ready to enter a stage of building? We cannot until we realize that women's empowerment is directly correlated and linked to liberation.
What does the title of the panel mean to you?
Panel. Okay, so women's empowerment, what does it mean to me? It means for us to be included in all spaces. It means engage us, provide us with equal opportunity, to educate. And I always believe, that just like with Palestine or any issue in the world, education is key. Education, engagement, and creating opportunities for those, not just ourselves, the ones that maybe have reached a certain status, you know, here in America or in the blood, in the Middle East, but that have reached anyone, like a refugee. She said, why are we still having these conversations when a refugee woman, mother will come here and she doesn't know what to do, because she's not given those same opportunities, and she kind of has to start from scratch, as if we haven't done any work. And when you've done the work, when we've actually gotten to a place of success, is when every woman can start from here. And of course, we admit, there's always gonna be the class issue, right? But I'm saying even within Middle Eastern folks, women, depending on where you come from and your level of education and where your family's from, you don't get to start at the same place in the race. You don't. So what it means to me is for all women in our community to be treated equally. It means that if a woman is going through something in her marriage that is not very, like going through abuse, that it's not looked down upon if she talks about it, that she's not afraid of talking to the police. About 3-4 years ago, the Anaheim Police Department reached out to me and said, and other leaders in the community. And I was like, why are you reaching out to me? I'm like fighting for different stuff. They're like, well, you have a voice in the community, so we want you to tell us what to do. There's many women in your community that are experiencing domestic violence, but when we go to your homes, the woman doesn't speak. How can we handle this issue? I said, well, you create a liaison. You have to understand our community. So we're still in a place where other people are telling our stories, right? And other people are trying to manage our problems or issues. But see, the wrong people are doing that. We should be doing that. We should be the bridge. We should be the ones helping lift those women up so they can tell their stories. And does that make sense? So, for example, police departments should have an Arab American woman liaison. They should have a Muslim American woman liaison. Back in 2016, I helped with ICNA Relief, and we created the first domestic violence shelter for Muslim women. I cannot tell you how proud I was to do that. So proud. Something so basic, right? We've been around forever, but it was 2016 when the first Muslim American shelter domestic violence shelter was created, right, in Southern California. I think I'm happy it happened, but I still find it as sad. And it shows you how backwards we are. So we need to stop silencing women and saying, "Aib, aib." You know, woman doesn't speak. Aib is like basically shame. Shame on you. Don't expose your family. That's not the woman's job. A woman is supposed to hold the house. She's the brick. You're right. Women are the ones who lift up the household. Women are the ones who preserve our culture. But at the same time, we need to take care of our women. All of our women, all of them. I think Noor was reflecting on her grandmother and her strength. Well, my grandmother, Sitti Alia, Sitti, which is the word for grandma for the Tafallah term, Teta is the one that's the cooler term. You know, she's the toughest woman ever. My grandfather left her when she was like, I don't know, 17. He didn't leave her because he wanted to. He left her because he had to bring money to the household. He left her with 8 children. She would tell me, "Yeah, Sitti, yeah, grandma, I used to work the fields and the olive trees. I would give birth to one of my children, pop them on my back, and keep working." I was like, damn. And I complain about washing laundry, you know, or vacuuming. So what women used to do back then is at no comparison. We haven't even reached their level. Was that empowerment? No. I believe that means that they were powerful. What happens is when women, just like when World War II happened, right? Women are put in positions of power when men are not around. But we need to be positions of power even when men are around. It shouldn't take a war, or it shouldn't take a men leaving a town for women to have power or to be put in the lead. Do you get what I'm saying? That's when it happens. We're allowed to be leaders when men are not around. You know, a few years back, you know, there was initiative where these women wanted to open a mosque and they wanted to be the ones to lead prayers. Oh my God, you will not believe the drama in our community. Astaghfirullah al-Azim. Women want to lead prayers. Oh my God. I was like, yeah, Jama'ah, people, come on. Really? Who cares? Let them lead the prayer. Let women have a mosque and lead the prayers. Why would that be an issue? That is not our biggest issue. Worry about the fact that our language has no space. Worry about the fact that in Anaheim there are so many Arabs, and guess what? We have been fighting for over 15 years for us to call the District of Arabia, where everybody and their mother calls it Little Arabia, right? But everybody and their mother says, oh yeah, that's Little Arabia. Guess what? We're still fighting till today to be able to call that Little Arabia District. Even though everybody and their mother knows that's where you eat falafel, man. That's where you go to the falafel, hummus, shawarma, whatever, you go to Anaheim. Yet we're fighting about who is going to lead a prayer. Wow. Wow. That is not what is Islam about. Or for example, where there's a Jordanian organization, one is a Muslim one, the other one is not Muslim, it's Christian, and it's an issue and they're not working together. Why? Why? You know when Arab Americans are going to be empowered? When we learn that we're one. All of us, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, I don't care where you're from, okay? That we are one community. And when that happens, of course, because women are going to lead that march, right? Then we will be at a playing ground. I'm not saying that if you're a housewife that you're not empowered. I want to make sure people understand that. What defines empowerment is individual to every person. When there's a disenfranchisement or an inequity of a person in an equal place, that's when there's no empowerment. When my princess Aya, right, and Salma and Rakan are not equal, for me, I raise my 3 kids the same. People say, Mervet, hold on, are you going to let Aya and Salma do what Rakan does? We're not. That shows us right there that we have an issue right in the community. When I have people ask me, are you going to let your 3 kids do the same thing? Yeah, of course I am. As for our identity, I know I individually fight to keep our identity. My kids used to be like, please, Mom, please don't make me Lebanon hummus sandwiches for lunch. Please, the kids are gonna look at us. Guess what? Now the teachers ask me for hummus. They're like, Mervet, could you make that hummus? Zayt al-za'atar, please, you're gonna embarrass us. They think it's like this weird stuff. Point is, we need to come to a place that our language is not embarrassing, that our food is not embarrassing. I see people say, yeah, like, a lot of people think it's cool to like that. I'm not really Arab, like I'm an Arab American. And it's like, I don't really want to speak Arabic because, you know, they're gonna look at me. That's sad. That is sad. You know, when I graduated from UCI, you would think you were in a Palestinian debke. There were more thobs there. It was like a Palestinian fashion show. I was not ashamed. There were zaghratin, and people were like, what's going on? I was proud. So when we reach a place where we all unite and we stop being ashamed of who we are and we actually give voices to women and stop shaming them when if a man was going through the same thing, we would actually give them representation, women will be empowered. Thank you for your time.
I want to say that women are doing a great job. I'm very proud of our women in our community, despite all the hardship that we've heard about. I think our women are in the forefront of the struggle. I could not be more proud to be among some of the most amazing women in our movement. I think they are making a meaningful impact. They're marching, they're rallying, they're organizing. They're protecting our Palestinian identity. And more so, they are planning our return and teaching their children to plan the return. And I couldn't be more proud to be among one of the most amazing women communities in all time, the Palestinian women. Thank you.
I want to allow some time for the audience questions, but I have one final question to pose to these ladies, but I think it also makes sense to pose to everyone here. And it's a question that I always think about, and I'd love to crowdsource some ideas, and that's something that both of you touched on, all three of you, and it's how do we mobilize? Let's talk about the future now, right? So how do we unite as women, as Arabs, as Muslims, as Christians, as Palestinian, as Jordanian? What, if I can ask you for the next 5 things to do, a to-do list, I'm curious to know everyone's opinion. I'll start with these ladies and then we'll shoot it to the floor. Noura, go ahead.
Ah, I'm the lucky one, huh? Okay. Well, I think usually when it comes to community building, one, really looking at the potential within the community. And when I say that, I mean, we have so many skills and so many resources for each of us as individuals, but we don't have a model or a way in which people can invest that to the community. I guess for lack of better terms, put it in the most American way, pro bono. But back home, that's just what you do. You just take care of your neighborhood. But what are the things we can offer and pull together to make available for our people in our community, whether it's networking or skills or knowledge, but what is that? And that is coupled with what values do we want to instill and uphold. I really think we are in dire need of some standards in our community. Back home, we had women protesting against the corruption of the Palestinian Authority, and they were beat by male policemen, and nobody came to their rescue. That's a problem. And I bring that up because I think they went front and center to confront the assassination of Nizar Banat. They protested against corruption, and they were not only beat up, but they were threatened. They were blackmailed. They were told, we're gonna steal your phones and expose all your secrets that are in your phones by the so-called intelligence service. That's the risk that women face when they wanna confront oppression head on. In the spirit of that instance, what were we doing here? That broke my heart. I looked at women's associations, I looked at different Arab organizations, Palestinians. What was our response when we see our daughters beat in the streets of Ramallah around the Manara? عيب علينا. What values are we instilling here for our community? What are the standards? And what is خط الأحمر? شو هو خط الأحمر? Do we have that defined here? Because it seems that many want to go around and do what is good for them and their own interests or their organization's interests. We are at a time where we need a red line. And we need values to lead us towards that goal that we share as a community. كل واحد فاتح لي دكانه. Organizations left and right, leaders left and right. Where's the consensus on what it is we are doing and what values we are upholding? So in addition to how do we source and pool those resources so we are sustainable and self-reliant? So for example, with all due respect, I would disagree ever talking to police in any way. Why don't we have something within our community that safeguards our women without having to use the force that kills black people? It's scary to think that we have to resort to institutions or other organizations or entities to leverage some kind of support for us when we know that same entity might go back and harm other people. So what is that pooling? What is that networking? How do we identify those resources here so we can look inward rather than outward? What are those values that we want to protect and uphold? And where's the red line? We are in a state right now where I think lines are being crossed, and because we don't have definitions, people are getting away with it, and now the movement has become completely blurry. We're thinking, where are we headed? We don't even have a clear definition at moments when it comes to what normalization is. Some people justify it as this, and some people say that. Back home, they have a standard, and it's very clear. So why do we allow ourselves to get away with loose definitions here? But we expect the ones at the front line back home to uphold the strict definition and to suffer because of it. That's a sign of our American experience and our imposition that I keep talking about. We have to hold ourselves to the same standards. My question is, what are the spaces to create those standards? How do we create buy-in? Who are those voices there? And how are we going to ensure that space is open to everybody rather than dominated by the same names and the same entities that have not moved with the changing dynamics of our reality back home?
Thank you, Noura. I need to get the question first. We have 2 minutes left, and then we'll go back to you, ladies.
Thank you so much for coming here and speaking in such an inspirational and powerful manner. As a Palestinian American woman, it's extremely invigorating and motivating. My question is, how are you ensuring that you avoid burnout? How do you allow yourself to rest and ensuring that you stay motivated and kind of not become hopeless and just like with the sheer amount of work that we have to do?
Hello? Okay, so for myself, yes, you do get burned out because there aren't that many people that are willing to step up. But what I do is I try to encourage women around in my community. The thing is, as long as you're not invested in just wanting to be a leader and being the only one, then it's not so difficult. You just have to go in and talk to the younger folks. So what I do is I talk to younger girls, and I, instead of, like, for example, when I'm given an opportunity of leadership, I give it away. That's how I do it. I give it away. And it's cost me not moving up as high as I would have, but I don't care about that because my investment is in the community, my Arab American community, my Muslim American community, and women in general. And since that's my investment, that's how I do it, because otherwise you will get burned out. If your interest is in, like, I'm the one who do it, I'm the one who's gonna do it, then you're gonna get burned out. I wanted to comment on the last question. Can I do it or not? Do you wanna answer? 30 seconds. Okay, so I want to just say that talking to the police isn't always wrong, and I'm going to say that as a woman perspective, so I completely disagree with you on that token. It doesn't mean that police are good, but there are good ones, and there's a reason they're in place. And sometimes that is the only entity you can go to. And I think it's good that any organization reaches out to an Arab American woman or organization. As for organizations, I do think we have too many, but you know what? We also have lots of opinions. And if it means it takes 100 organizations to get my people involved, well, ahla wa sahla.
I like to chime in on this a bit. For me, I always ask myself this question because, one of my friends here, we talk about this all the time, getting tired and staying motivated. One, for me, is I always compare what I go through and the exhaustion of activism and all of this compares nothing to what our women go through in Palestine. So that's one, is no matter what I do is never as hard or as difficult as what they're going through. Two is understanding we're making a progress. It's very encouraging. Our struggle never have been in the forefront of issues like it has recently. And this is because of the tireless work of many of the activists and, of course, our brave people back in Palestine. So that also keeps me encouraged. Thirdly is connecting with activists like myself in different areas, different platforms. It is always encouraging to be with like-minded activists who are focused on advancing our cause, who are always looking for ways to make a difference. And it is just amazing for me. It has been this journey of learning from them and re-energizing, connecting our struggles together and talking about how we can make a difference. And again, I go back to the fact that we are making a progress is very encouraging. So stay focused on the goal and be true to what you believe, and this on its own will help you stay doing this longer.
Thank you. Chris, do you have another question over there?
Thank you. Thank you, ladies. You're very powerful. I'm a psychologist, and I think it is so important. Part of what you have to advocate for is mental health. And especially, I see it every single day, especially with the increasing number of the refugees. And the story of your mom, it just touched me. I hear horrific stories from men, women, children. And what really hurts me is, they call me, they want to have therapy, but it's expensive. They cannot afford it. And, I usually reduce it and whatever. But not, a lot of abuse, especially with the COVID, more divorces, more domestic violence. So I really think what you should advocate also is like an organization that, like you stated, will encompass services for people who are coming in and for people who need therapy. Because when you go through wars in Iraq and in Syria and everywhere in the Middle East now, and you come here, there is so much trauma that's paralyzing you from moving forward. Whether you want to go get education, whether you want to go get a job, and you're having nightmares and you're not sleeping at night, it's affecting every aspect of your life and relationships. I know in Detroit they have access. I was so proud. I went many years ago, and they provide mental health, and they provide other access to different avenues that this person can reach out to. Like one of you stated, the connection with this and this and this. Somebody come here who doesn't speak English. So how can they get a job and learn and their immigration and all these, including their mental health? So we really need to advocate for an organization, to build organizations in every single state and every single places that you live in and everywhere, to allow these people, and it could be backed up by the government, financially, to allow these people to bloom. When you're paralyzed by all these nightmares and your father has been kidnapped and you saw this person killed, and every day you hear somebody else got killed and bombed, back home, it's paralyzing. So you're wonderful speakers, and it's wonderful for everyone here to advocate for, organizations that can take these people and move them forward with all these services, including mental health, because it's so crucial. Thank you.
I wanted to say a very good point, and just so you could know, in our community, they didn't used to have the mental health conversations. Now Access California, ICNA Relief, various organizations, including mosques, are having actual talks. Before it was a taboo, now it isn't. So we are headed in a positive direction. Last thing I want to say is thank you so much. We were talking about things that we can do. Panels like this one regarding power, women's empowerment, and having these conversations. Thank you. Thank you, ADC.
Yeah, and just to address that, I think with mental health, it's important that we have decolonized and culturally relevant spaces. And I think also, when we bring up issues of funding, and again, this comes back to that sustainability model. When you take a grant from the government that's bombed those people, what values are being instilled in that grant to further assimilate those who are traumatized? So we have all of South County, Odeh, and we have a lot of wealth in this area. But how do we cultivate that wealth to ensure that we are funding healthy services for our people rather than services that want to further acculturate them or assimilate them or to treat them in a certain way? I think culturally relevant practices are super important. With ethnic studies, we brought that up, but also in the mental health field, I think that's super important. Across the country, there's very few Arab American therapists who are available to youth, and we struggle to find those. And slowly, we can build that up, but again, it comes back to cultivating resources as a collective and agreeing, okay, this is definitely a resource, not only just for refugees and those who suffered because of U.S. War crimes in their homelands, but also for our first generation and second generation youth here. We have an issue with substance abuse. We have an issue with domestic abuse. There's a lot of things happening here that have resulted in our presence here on this stolen land in this society. So I think us being the source of that support is definitely needed, but when it comes to the funding in particular, I think we have to be super careful because with that funding comes the values that are instilled with every dollar sign that they give to our people.
Thank you. I know there's more questions, but I'm being told to wrap up, and I'm trying to be on time. I know these ladies, I'm sure, would be happy to stay around and chat with everyone. I want to thank them for their time and the very, very interesting and enlightening and hopefully motivating conversation. Thank you, ladies, and thank you, everyone. Have a good day.